Theo Halloway's phone, reeking of stagnant water and sulfur, buzzed with texts on its dead screen. I didn't need the glow. The smell was enough, like drowned fish scales left to rot in a drain. I pried the casing open with my pocket knife, the plastic snapping like dry bone. Inside, the circuitry was a nest of dead wires, but wedged between the chips, embedded like a fossil, was a key. Its metal teeth were cold, sharp, vibrating against my palm as I prized it free. The vibration traveled up my wrist, a low thrum that made my skin prickle. I held it up. The key was old, tarnished, its teeth carved into a jagged pattern, not a key for a door, a key for something else. The smell of ozone intensified, thickening in the air like wet hair pressed against my face. It smelled like lightning trapped in a bottle. I stood on the cracked sidewalk outside the storage facility, the jaundiced yellow street lamp casting long, skeletal shadows. The air hummed, not with insects but with 1,000 bees trapped in glass, their sound a constant, high-pitched drone that vibrated in my teeth. The key felt heavier now, the cold metal seeping into my skin. I turned it over. The teeth matched the shape of the two-headed cat I'd seen in the alley yesterday. The cat that never blinked. The cat that communicated through dreams I couldn't remember. Its fur was 2 different shades of yellow, like old butter. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but now it felt like a map. A keyhole in a storage unit door was exactly the shape of the cat's profile. 2 jagged openings, like its ears. I walked toward the unit, the keyhole waiting. The air grew colder, the ozone smell sharper, like licking a battery. The humming sound of the bees intensified, 1,000 tiny wings beating against my eardrums. I inserted the key. It slid in with a smooth metallic click. The keyhole was a perfect fit. The 2 heads of the cat, I thought, tilting toward the keyhole. The air around the door seemed to ripple, the jaundiced yellow light deepening. The key turned. The sound was a dry scrape like stone on stone, then silence. The humming of the bees faded abruptly. The ozone smell vanished. The storage unit door, which had been slightly ajar, began to move. Not opening. Closing. The sound was a wet, metallic hiss, like a seal snapping shut. The door slid smoothly, silently, until it was flush with the wall. The cat's 2 heads tilted toward the keyhole as the door fused shut with a final hissing sigh. The street lamp flickered once, casting a single, elongated shadow across the pavement. Then the light died. Only the smell of ozone remained, sharp and electric in the sudden, absolute dark. The storage unit smelled of dust and regret, a dry, brittle scent that clung to the back of my throat. I fumbled for the light switch, finding only a corroded plate. Moonlight spilled through the cracks in the corrugated metal, a jaundiced wash across the floor. The ozone smell was back, stronger now, crackling like shattered glass as it pressed against my skin. I knelt, the cold seeping through my jeans. The diary lay on a rickety table, bound in what looked like human skin. A foolish detail, perhaps, but in this place nothing felt quite right. I opened it. The pages were thick, yellowed parchment, brittle with age. The ink was faint, almost invisible in the dim light. I held the diary closer to the moonlight, filtering through the cracks, and then it appeared 20, a spidery script, elegant and unsettling, blooming into existence as if drawn from the shadows. The words felt damp, clinging to the page like condensation. I flipped through, the parchment whispering against itself, a dry, rustling lament. Most of the entries were nonsensical ramblings about harvests and lineage, but then a shift, a tightening of the script, a descent into something. The smell of ozone intensified, prickling my nostrils. I continued to turn the pages, searching for something, though I didn't know what. A name, a date, a clue. The handwriting grew erratic, the sentences fragmented. Then the final entry, it wasn't written, exactly. It appeared, the ink blooming on the page like a malignant flower there. They're coming for the lock. The ink pulsed. It seemed to writhe, to seem to wreathe. A warmth spread from the page, a phantom fire licking at my fingertips. I recoiled, dropping the diary. The smell of ozone became overwhelming, a suffocating pressure against my chest. The jaundiced yellow stain from the diary bled across my wrist, spreading like a slow-motion burn. It felt warm, not painful but unsettlingly so, like the heat radiating from a fevered brow. I stared at my arm, the yellow stain deepening, the parchment scent rising from my skin. It wasn't just a stain, it was consuming. The edges of the stain began to shimmer, distorting the light. The storage unit itself seemed to warp, the corrugated metal walls breathing in and out with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The humming I'd heard earlier returned, but it was different now. Not the sound of bees, but something deeper, something resonant, vibrating in the very bones of the building. The pages of the diary began to ripple, the ink flowing off the parchment and towards the metal walls. It flowed like liquid gold, pooling in the seams of the corrugated iron. The scent of wet parchment intensified, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. The diary itself seemed to dissolve, the pages melting into the walls, becoming one with the structure of the unit. The yellow stain on my wrist pulsed again, a slow, deliberate beat. The ozone smell was all-encompassing now, a physical weight pressing down on me. The last thing I saw before the world dissolved into a shimmering yellow haze was the two-headed cat. Its yellow fur the same shade as the stain on my skin, its eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. The stone was cold, a glacial slab beneath my palms. My fingers traced the grooves of the carving, the chisel marks still fresh, still sharp. The air reeked of ozone, a metallic tang that coiled in my lungs like a serpent, coiling tighter with each breath. I knelt, my knees sinking into the damp earth, the scent of wet soil mingling with the acrid stench of the air. The moonlight-inked pages lay spread before me, their ink shimmering like liquid gold in the pale glow of the moon. I pressed them against the stone, the parchment whispering against the rough surface. A dry, rustling lament. The pages seemed to melt into the stone, their ink seeping into the cracks, blooming like ink spilled on a canvas. The scent of ozone intensified, prickling my nostrils, a suffocating pressure against my chest. The lid of the coffin clicked shut with a sound like 1,000 bees humming in unison, a low, resonant vibration that echoed through the chamber. The air thickened, pressing against my skin like a second layer, a weight that clung to my bones. I stood, my breath shallow, my hands trembling as I reached for the key. It lay on the floor cold and unyielding, its edges sharp, its surface etched with the same carving that now adorned the lid of the coffin. The key fit perfectly into the lock, a perfect match, as if it had been carved for this moment, this place. The air shimmered, the ozone crackling like shattered glass. A sound that vibrated in my skull, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very bones of the building. The carving on the lid glowed with a jaundiced yellow light, a sickly, feverish hue that pulsed like a heartbeat. The light seeped into the air, a slow, deliberate spread, a radiance that seemed to consume the shadows, to melt them into nothingness. The scent of ozone became overwhelming, a suffocating pressure that pressed against my chest, a weight that threatened to crush me. I stepped back, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. The light from the carving pulsed again, a slow, deliberate beat, a rhythm that echoed in my bones. The air shimmered, the ozone crackling like shattered glass, a sound that vibrated in my skull, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very bones of the building. The diary's pages lay open on the metal shelf, their edges frayed like singed fingers. I pressed my palm against the ink, the first letter still wet, still glistening with a sheen that wasn't quite liquid, more like the residue of a dream half-remembered. The moment my skin touched it, the air split open, not with sound, but with a thudded tearing, as if the very fabric of the room had been slit along its seams. A high, keening note, no, not a note, a 5 presence filled the storage unit, vibrating in my bones not as a shake, but as a fermenting, like my skeleton had been dipped in warm wax and left to drip. The ink burned, not the clean surgical sting of alcohol, but the slow, wet drag of a blade across raw muscle. I hissed, but the sound didn't come from my throat. It was the diary itself, whispering through my teeth, a chorus of 1,000 bees trapped in amber, their hum rising in pitch until it scraped against the inside of my skull. The stench of it, ozone, but thicker, richer, like the air before a storm that never breaks. Only 2 presses, my fingers curled into claws, but the ink didn't stop spreading. It crawled up my wrist in jagged veins of sickly gold, eating through the layers of skin like acid through silk. The heat followed, not the dry prickle of fever, but the deep suffocating press of a brand held too long against flesh. I knew what to do. The needle was still in my pocket, stolen from the back room of the diner, where I worked nights, where the coffee grounds tasted like ash and the customers never stayed long enough to ask questions. I pulled it out, the metal cold against my trembling fingers, and threaded it with the only thing I had left, a strip of black ribbon torn from the edge of the diary's cover. The thread snapped in my grip once, twice before I managed to pierce the first stitch. The needle bit into my skin, but the pain was distant, muffled by the hum, by the way. The ink pulsed in time with the bees. 1, 2, 3. Each stitch was a sin, a sacrament. The thread cut through the spreading gold, but not cleanly. It left behind raw, weeping tracks, like the skin of a fruit that had rotted from the inside out. The bees' song sharpened, a discordant chorus now, their voices overlapping into something worse, A child's laughter, distorted, stretched thin over the years. The sound of a throat slit too deep to ever heal. I swallowed, and the taste of copper filled my mouth. Not blood, but the metallic tang of the ink, the diary's curse seeping into my veins. The door was the last thing. I didn't turn the key. Keys were for locks that still had teeth. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold metal, and the moment my palm made contact, the door breathed deed. Not a shiver, not a shudder. Inflated D, like a lung filling with poisoned air. The bee's hum rose into a crescendo, a sound that wasn't just in my ears but in my sooteeth fee, my suvi bones, a vibration that wasn't a sound at all but the idea of sound. The way a name tastes when you've forgotten its meaning. The metal groaned, not with stress but with twin pleasure, the way a body arches under a touch it shouldn't want. The edges of the door softened, then melted, not like wax but like funflesh, dissolving into a haze of gold. My breath fogged in the sudden cold, but it wasn't cold. It was the absence of heat, the way a flame goes out when you stop feeding it air. The bee's song faded into silence, leaving only the child's laughter, softer now, almost gentle, as the door dissolved into nothing. And then the door was gone. The yellow stain pulsed on my wrist, a sickly bloom against the pale skin. It felt warm, not the comforting warmth of sunlight, but the unsettling heat of something alive, something growing. I knelt, the grit of the storage unit floor grinding into my knees. The air tasted like iron, a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat, and the jaundiced yellow of the stain seemed to leach into the very dust motes dancing in the scant light filtering from the hallway. The two-headed cat Bast watched me. Its eyes, twin pools of amber, reflected the sickly light, and the way its heads tilted, mimicking each other, was a mockery of curiosity. One head emitted a low, guttural rumble, a sound that resonated not in my ears but in the marrow of my bones. The other, a higher, almost chirping trill that seemed to vibrate the air itself. It moved then, a fluid, unsettling grace, and flit-licked the stain on my wrist. The rasp of its tongue against my skin was like the sound of parchment tearing, a dry, brittle whisper against the silence. Bast's ice movements became deliberate, its gaze fixed on the wall of storage unit doors. The bee's humming, which had been a constant oppressive presence, faltered. Not a sudden silence, but a hesitant stutter, like a record skipping on a damaged groove. The air grew heavy, thick, with the scent of something ancient, something buried. It wasn't tea decay, not exactly, but the smell of things that should have crumbled to dust long ago. Things held together by a force I didn't. The wall itself was a bizarre anomaly. Identical metal doors fused together, the seams blurred, the rivets swallowed by a creeping yellow fungus. It wasn't just that they were joined, it was that they seemed to flow into each other, the metal rippling like the surface of a stagnant pond. The yellow stain on my wrist seemed to mirror the fungus, a shared contagion. A wave of nausea rolled over me, a cold sweat slicking my skin. The child's laughter, which had been a distant echo, intensified, a high-pitched giggle that seemed to emanate from the wall itself. Bast took a step, a single deliberate movement. Its paws made no sound on the concrete floor, defying the expected scrape of claws on grit. The bee's humming ceased entirely. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise, a vacuum of sensation that pressed against my eardrums. I wanted to look away, to shut my eyes and pretend this wasn't tea happening, but I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the yellow stain, the fungal wall, and the unsettling stillness of the cat. The wall shimmered, the fused doors distorting like a heat mirage. The yellow fungus seemed to writhe, pulsing with an internal light. The air grew colder, not a chill, but the absence of warmth, a void that threatened to consume everything. I could taste the ozone now, not just a tang on my tongue, but a burning sensation in my nostrils, a metallic poison flooding my senses. The child's laughter grew louder, closer, morphing into something else entirely fundy, a song, a prayer, a lament. Bast took another step, and then another. Its movements were no longer feline, but something else, something other. It didn't walk. It twin-flowed its form, blurring at the edges, the twin heads tilting in perfect unison. The walls seemed to part for it, the metal yielding like water. The final step was a vanishing. One moment the cat was there, a grotesque mockery of nature, the next it was gone. The wall solidified behind it, the fused doors seamless once more. The bees remained silent. The yellow stain on my wrist pulsed, a slow, steady beat against my skin. And I was left standing alone in the storage unit, the taste of iron heavy on my tongue, the scent of something ancient clinging to my clothes, and the echo of a child's laughter ringing in my ears. The cat had stepped through. It was gone, swallowed by a door that wasn't there a moment before. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it had gone to 1793 to Paris. To the reign of terror. The moon hung heavy in the Parisian sky, a bloated crescent casting an oily light over cobblestone streets slicked by rain. The city lay silent under its gaze, as if holding its breath against some unseen horror. I stood before an ancient door, the wood worn smooth by time and touch, my heart pounding in sync with the distant tolling of bells, a grim metronome counting down to revolution. The key turned in the lock with the reluctant groan of metal on metal, a sound that echoed through the house like a death rattle. The air inside was thick with dust and disuse, heavy with the scent of ozone from some long-forgotten lightning strike. It tasted like iron on my tongue, a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. I moved deeper into the house, each footstep echoing in the silence. The humming of bees filled the void left by the absence of human life, their unison buzz resonating against the walls, vibrating in my molars like an unseen dentist's drill. It was a sound that seemed to speak directly to the marrow of my bones, urging me forward. The study was where I found him, or rather, his ghostly echo lingering over the desk like a malevolent spectre. The air grew colder around me as I approached, not just degrees cooler but an absence of warmth, a void that threatened to consume everything it touched. An old leather-bound journal lay open on the desktop, its pages yellowed with age and time. I leaned closer, my breath fogging against the glass protecting the diary from prying fingers like mine. The ink seemed to shimmer under the moonlight filtering through the window, appearing only as I watched, crawling across the page like some obscene creature birthed of darkness. It was a sight that should have been impossible, yet here it was, another miracle wrought by my ancestor's cursed heirloom. The watch lay heavy in my pocket now, its ticking resonating with every beat of my heart. I could feel the weight of it, not just physically but spiritually. It felt alive against my skin, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to throb in time with the bees' ceaseless humming. I reached out slowly, hesitantly, towards the carving etched into the wooden lid of the coffin, standing sentinel at the room's center. The wood was cold beneath my fingertips, and I traced its edges carefully, feeling each groove and ridge as if reading braille written by a madman. My eyes followed along with my fingers until they came to rest upon two words carved deep: the lock. A sudden chill swept through me then, not merely from the temperature dropping, but from something else. An unseen presence, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply understanding dawning like an eclipse over my mind's eye. The buzzing of bees grew louder suddenly too, their hum filling every corner of the room until there wasn't even silence left anymore. Then came the ozone crackle, sharp and biting as lightning striking close by but never touching down, a sound that made me flinch despite knowing it was coming. And with it arrived another sight, moonlight spilling into the room through an unseen window high above us both. Too small for any human to crawl through, perhaps even if one were foolish enough to try. But this wasn't natural light, no. It shimmered and writhed like something alive, casting twisted shadows that danced macabrely across every surface they touched. And there in its center lay the pocket watch ignited by moonlight until it glowed as brightly as a tiny sun held captive within metal jaws. And I knew then what needed to be done next. Not just because of some whispered command given long ago, but rather due to an understanding forged deep within my own bones. Time had come for me to seal the coffin lid, and with it lock away once more that which should never have been allowed out again. The watch ticked louder now, its rhythm echoing in my ears like a heartbeat, amplified by some infernal machine. The moonlight striking it began to intensify, growing brighter until it seemed to glow from within. Not just silver but molten gold, casting off rays that seared into my eyes and burned onto the back of my skull. I felt heat then, sudden and fierce as if I'd been plunged into boiling water. It started at my hands where they gripped the watch case, fingers curling like claws around metal grown too hot to touch. My skin blistered almost instantly, bubbles rising like tiny pustules before bursting with a hiss that mingled with the ceaseless humming of bees. Their song grew louder now, filling not just the room but every inch of my being until there was nothing left, except their discordant melody played out against the backdrop of my own screams. They resonated in my molars again, vibrations pulsing through bone and flesh like 1,000 tiny hammers striking at once. The pain was immense, consuming all thought save one. Let go, but I couldn't. Wouldn't. This was what he wanted me to do. This was why he'd left the key on my doorstep, leading me here step by excruciating step into his lair. And so, despite every fiber of my being crying out against it, I held tight. The watch face glowed brighter still, until it cast no shadow at all, but only swallowed light whole and spat forth something else entirely. An image began to form there amidst the fiery tendrils licking up from its edges. It was my reflection initially, or so I thought, before distortions crept in, warping features into something unrecognizable yet familiar too somehow. I watched as eyes appeared first, two tiny points of darkness burning deep within sockets, hollowed out like coal mines ready to collapse inward upon themselves at any moment. Then came the mouth, teeth, jagged shards of obsidian set into gums stained black by decay. And finally, hair sprouting from scalp and face alike, each strand writhing like a serpent desperate to escape its own skin. This was no longer me staring back, but him, my ancestor, his curse manifest within this infernal device now burning hotter than any sun could ever dream of doing so much as touching. And still, I held on, fingers fused with metal by sweat and blood mingling together in rivulets running down wrist to elbow. The bees hummed louder yet, if such a thing were possible. Their song became something else entirely too now, words forming amidst cacophony. Burn, they chanted over and over again until there was nothing left but that single command echoing through every fiber of my being. Burn. And then came the final realization. Not just understanding dawning within me, but knowledge imprinted onto very soul itself as if branded there by some unseen hand wielding a red-hot iron. This is what he wants. This is why I'm here. To burn, to consume, to become one with him forevermore locked away inside this accursed timepiece. So be it then. Let the fire take me whole, and make of me whatever twisted thing it wills, for there is no turning back now, nor any desire left within myself. Save one, let go at last, lest I too be consumed utterly by flames licking ever closer. Hungry tongues lapping up every inch of my flesh, until naught remains but ash scattered upon winds howling, like lost souls trapped eternally betwixt worlds. I opened my hands finally, slowly, deliberately, and as they did so the watch slipped free from grasp to fall tumbling end over end towards floorboards, worn smooth by centuries past beneath countless feet treading out paths long since forgotten. It struck wood with a sound unlike any other, not clatter nor clang, but something altogether more visceral somehow. Wet parchment tearing perhaps, or maybe flesh splitting open under blade's edge. Glass shattered too then, shards flying wide like tiny daggers before landing scattered across room, amidst remnants of whatever once lay trapped beneath lid, now thrown wide, revealing depths hidden therein until this moment. And there amidst broken gears and splintered hands ticking on regardless, despite all reason screaming against such madness, sat my face staring back up at me. Not just reflection, but true embodiment thereof, every line etched deep into flesh, as if carved there by some mad artist seeking perfection through pain alone. Yet even now it wasn't over, couldn't be, for this was his power made manifest within those eyes burning brighter, still amidst darkness consuming all else. They watched me watching them back until finally I could stand no more and turned away, fleeing shattered remnants of myself scattered across floorboards, stained yellow with age and something else too, jaundiced horror writ large upon every surface they touched. But there was nowhere left to run now save into arms awaiting embrace, since before time itself began. For, aren't we all bound together, thusly? Entwined fates woven tight as threads spun from darkness itself, each one destined ultimately to burn bright, then fade away leaving naught behind, but echoes lingering long after flames have died down low enough. Finally for embers too to grow cold and silent at last. I fell forwards onto knees gone weak beneath me now, hands pressing against cool stone floor damp with condensation born of some unseen breath exhaled into room by forces beyond comprehension. And there amidst darkness ringing out loud around ears like 1,000 bees humming in unison came final realization. I am his now, he is mine. The watch lay shattered upon ground beside us both, yet still ticking on regardless, defying all logic and reason with every beat of its cursed heart. But then so too did my own pulse resonate through veins carrying life's blood back towards center, where once more we were joined together as one. Bound by fate eternal until end times themselves should come calling forth our names, amidst thunderous applause. And thus, I knelt there upon cold stone floor awaiting whatever came next, knowing full well there could be no turning back now, nor any escape left open save through flames licking ever closer, hungry tongues lapping up every inch of my flesh, until naught remained but ash scattered upon winds howling like lost souls trapped eternally betwixt worlds. The watch felt heavy, a leaden weight pressing into my palm, not just metal but a solidified dread. I angled it towards the door, the warped wood of the storage unit, a jaundiced stain, already blooming across the surface, like a malignant flower pushing through concrete. It smelled wrong, not of rot or dampness, but of something processed, like overripe fruit left to ferment in a sterile environment. I brought my heel down, the force of it sending the watch skittering across the floorboards. The impact resonated through the unit twendo, not a crack, not a splinter, but a wet twinther through food, like a melon dropped onto damp earth. The stain on the door pulsed, a sickly yellow light radiating from its edges. It spread rapidly, tendrils of color snaking across the wood, consuming the grain, the metal hinges. The air thickened, a palpable pressure against my skin. My breath hitched, tasting of something metallic and acrid. The humming stopped. Just like that, the incessant drone that had burrowed into my skull vanished, leaving a ringing silence that felt more oppressive than any sound. A void. I braced myself, expecting something. A scream, a shudder, a visible shift in the very fabric of reality. Instead, there was only the relentless advance of the yellow stain swallowing everything in its path. My gaze fell on the cat. It sat perched on a stack of discarded crates, its two heads swiveling, obsidian eyes fixed on the spreading stain. It didn't move, didn't react. Just watched, a silent feline witness to the unfolding transformation. Its fur, usually a dull gray, seemed to absorb the encroaching yellow, becoming almost luminous, a disturbing mimicry of the light consuming the door. I felt a pang of something akin to pity, a fleeting tenderness for the creature bound to this place. This ritual. The stain reached the floor, a tide of sickly yellow. It flowed around my ankles, a viscous, clinging substance. The ozone smell intensified, sharp and stinging. I could taste it now, a bitter tang on my tongue. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot. It was as if the very air was solidifying, trapping me within this chamber of decay. Then the cat moved. Not a leap, not a bound, but a dissolution. It seemed to melt into the stain, its form blurring, distorting, until it was no longer a cat at all, but a ripple in the yellow tide. A shimmering distortion, a moment of absolute stillness, a pregnant pause, and then it was gone. The stain remained, now a complete and utter coating of the door. It shimmered, not with light, but with a deeper, more unsettling quality. A distortion of space itself. A portal. A rush of frigid air swept over me, carrying the scent of wet stone and wood smoke. The air tasted different, sharper, older. I stumbled back, disoriented, the ringing in my ears intensifying. The silence felt wrong. I could almost hear it, a faint murmur carried on the wind. A cacophony of voices, indistinct and layered, speaking in a language I did to understand, yet somehow knew. The murmur grew, coalescing into something more defined, something conversational. I braced myself, peering through the shimmering yellow stain. The storage unit, the facility, the familiar landscape of decay Findy, all vanished. I saw cobblestones. Narrow, twisting streets, buildings of grey stone, their facades blackened by soot and age. The air was heavy with the smell of coal smoke and something else, something raw and visceral like wet iron and fear. The year was 1793, and standing in the center of a bustling Parisian street, emerging directly from the shimmering yellow stain that had consumed the storage unit door, was the cat. Two heads tilted, obsidian eyes scanning the chaotic scene. It paused, then began to stalk forward. A silent predator in a world consumed by revolution. A world consumed by fire. The needle pricked, a sharp, precise violation of skin. Not pain, precisely, but a cold, insistent pressure that resonated deep within the bone. He braced himself, the cobblestones of the Parisian street slick with a recent rain, reflecting the flickering light of 1,000 tallow candles. The air smelled of coal dust and something else, something acrid and metallic that clung to the back of my throat. It was the smell of change, of inevitability, of sacrifice. He drove the diary into his chest, the leather binding biting into his ribs. The ink, a sickly black under the meager light, seemed to writhe beneath the surface of the aged paper. A low hum began, almost imperceptible at first. A vibration felt more than heard. It grew, a rising tide of sonic energy that pressed against my temples. Ozone, sharp and clean, crackled in the air, a prelude to something significant. The coat, a dark, heavy wool, ignited. Not with flame, but with a rapid, consuming heat that warped the fabric, pulling it taut against his skin. The smell of burning wool mingled with the ozone, creating a noxious cloud that stung my eyes. He did not cry out, did not flinch. His face was a mask of grim determination, a fanatic serenity. It was a beautiful thing, really, a testament to faith. The diary burned, the flames licking at the leather, consuming the ink. The words, the secrets held within, vanished into the ether. The hum intensified, resonating with the crackling fire, building to a fever pitch. I felt a tremor in the ground beneath my feet, a subtle shift in the very fabric of reality. The two-headed cat, perched on a nearby fountain, watched with its obsidian eyes, a silent, impassive observer of the ritual. It did not react to the heat, the smell, the escalating vibrations. It simply witnessed. The air grew thick, almost viscous. It felt as if I were submerged in a dense, suffocating fluid. The murmur of the Parisian crowd faded, replaced by the relentless hum and the crackling of the flames. A distorted child's voice, barely audible, seemed to weave itself into the soundscape, whispering something unintelligible. A promise, perhaps, or a warning. He was finished. The diary was almost entirely consumed, leaving only a charred husk clinging to his chest. The flames began to recede, leaving behind a blackened patch of wool and the lingering smell of ozone. He stood there, breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. He looked cleansed then. The cat moved. It descended from the fountain, its two heads swaying in unison, and approached the burning man. It lowered its head, its tongue flicking out, and began to lick the charred remains of the diary. A grotesque parody of affection, a sacred act. The licking was slow, deliberate, each pass drawing a faint hiss from the burning paper. The hum reached its apex, a deafening crescendo that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The world seemed to warp and twist, the cobblestone streets dissolving into a swirling vortex of color. The smell of ozone intensified, overwhelming everything else. And then, silence. The flames vanished. The hum ceased. The cat remained, its two heads bowed over the charred remains of the diary. And then, with a final shuddering sigh, its heads began to melt. Not into liquid, but into the very essence of the burning paper, the black ink spreading, consuming, until there was nothing left but a single fused mass of fur and ash. A horrifying, beautiful convergence. The diary, now fully consumed, left no trace. I hefted the diary, its leather binding cold against my palms, the black ink on the final page still faintly visible under the facility's flickering fluorescence. The air reeked of ozone, sharp as broken glass, and the hum from the previous ritual still vibrated in my molars. I raised the diary high, the jaundiced glow of the storage unit's lights reflecting off its spine, then slammed it against the steel door. The sound wasn't shattering glass. It was the sickening crack of wet parchment tearing, a sound like 1,000 tiny violins tuning to a single discordant pitch. The diary split open, spilling its ink like black blood across the cold metal. The stain spread instantly. Not like water, but like a slow, viscous honey made of old sunlight. It flowed across the floor, crawling up the walls with a faint, greasy frisson, consuming the concrete, the pipes, the very air. It didn't drip. It twimpooled, thick and copper, tinged, swallowing the hum of the facility's machinery whole. The bees began humming, not the distorted child's whisper, but a pure, resonant thrumming that filled the space between my ears, 1,000 tiny wings beating in perfect, chilling unison. It wasn't a sound I heard, it was a vibration I felt in my chest, a pressure building behind my eyes. The diary lay open on the door's threshold, the final page clear in the spreading stain. The lock is open. So the words seemed to writhe in the light. I watched the yellow stain consume the facility's emergency exit sign, the metal buckling and melting like wax under the light. The air grew thick, not with dust, but with the scent of ozone and something else, sun-bleached bone perhaps. The bees' hum intensified, a sound like 1,000 tiny needles pricking my eardrums. Then, the cat moved. It had been watching from the corner, its two heads motionless, observing the consumption. Now, it approached the door, the black fur of its neck catching the light. The heads lifted, and the glow began. Not a soft radiance, but a harsh, invasive light that burned the air around it, the color of weak sunlight through dirty water. It was the only light now, the facility's fluorescence flickering out, the stain's glow swallowing the room. The two heads pulsed with that light, the yellow radiating outwards, warm and terrible, the light of a promise and a warning. The hum reached a peak. The bees sound a single, pure note that filled the space, and then the cat's heads began to glow with that same jaundiced light, the light spreading from its eyes, the light of the open lock.